We're heading to Birmingham, 1884, to a terrible crime which happened on Paradise Street, of all places. This story includes a failed love, a shooting, a hanging, and a couple of ghosts. Emily Palmer was married to Thomas Palmer, who was the manager of several pubs in Birmingham, including the White Hart Inn, where these tragic events unfolded. Emily Palmer was well known and well liked in the area, and her best friend was Harriet Stewart. Harriet was a good friend who had been in the habit of calling on Emily when she was unwell. Harriet had been the common-law wife for 17 years of Henry Kimberley, a 53-year-old toolmaker. Their relationship was, however, becoming strained, and Harriet wished to leave. Henry and Harriet consulted a solicitor, and their separation was agreed. Harriet was granted most of their belongings and the house, while Henry got £20 and a piano. Henry, once papers were signed, almost immediately wanted to reverse the agreement. Angry and smarting from the rejection, he began to pursue Harriet relentlessly, following her, begging her to come back, and sending her letters expressing his desire that she return. Harriet flatly refused all advances. On the 27th of December 1884, Harriet was with her best friend Emily Palmer, and Henry was filled with anger, desperation, and a delusional belief that Thomas Palmer intended to make Harriet the manageress of one of his pubs. Henry Kimberley tried to see Harriet at Emily and Thomas's Gem Vaults pub on Steelhouse Lane. He was unsuccessful. Harriet and Emily left the Gem Vaults via the back door, and Henry followed them to the White Hart Inn. The friends found themselves seats in the small and more secluded snug of the pub. Henry found them and began to plead with Harriet for around 45 minutes, begging her to return to him. Again, she staunchly refused his advances. Finally, he asked, "Have you determined? Are you going to live with me or not?" When Harriet responded, "No, I am not," Henry calmly pulled out a pistol and shot Harriet at point-blank range in the neck. She fell to the floor bleeding. Emily instinctively reacted, trying to shield her friend and revive her. However, in doing so, the next bullet which Henry fired hit her in the chest. The bullet entered her lungs. Further altercations ensued as bar staff entered the snug and intervened. Henry also fired at them, but they did manage to detain Henry, alongside a postman and a butcher, until Police Constable Hart arrived to arrest Henry and confiscate the pistol. Both Harriet and Emily were taken to Queen's Hospital. Miraculously, Harriet survived the shooting. Sadly, though, Emily was not so fortunate. Emily passed away from her injuries on the 8th of January 1885 at the age of 37. Henry, who had initially been facing 2 charges of attempted murder, was now on a murder charge. The events which occurred on the 27th of December 1884 caused a great sensation amongst the public. Firstly, being well loved and supported, Emily's funeral procession on the 14th of January 1885, starting at the Gem Vaults pub which she had run on Steelhouse Lane and ending at Accock's Green, attracted thousands of mourners, with children missing school to attend. Henry's execution also drew the crowds. Although publicly witnessed executions were no longer permitted, the last one in the UK having taken place 18 years prior to Henry's, the prison would still put a notice up at the gates, signed by the governor of the prison, stating the date and time of the hanging no less than 12 hours beforehand. A sign would also be put up after the hanging, and often the prison bell would toll for 15 minutes after the execution. I presume that Henry may have been buried in the prison grounds, as this was the practice for those executed up until the 1920s. This was in an unmarked grave, which was often shared with other criminals. The Daily Post reported that the case acquired greater interest than commonly attaches to the hangman's duties. After being tried at the Birmingham Assizes in February, where it transpired that Henry had purchased the pistol for 12 shillings and 6 pennies 2 days before the crime, and where he exclaimed that the Palmers had been his undoing. Henry was executed by the state at 8 a.m. on the 17th of March 1885 at Winson Green Prison. James Berry was the executioner who pulled the bolt, and it was remarked that death appeared instantaneous. Henry became the first prisoner to be executed by the prison, which opened in 1849. It had also been 79 years since Birmingham's final public execution. These would have been the kind of executions performed publicly on the streets for all those with a morbid curiosity or a thirst for blood to witness firsthand. A report from the time went as follows. At a considerably earlier hour, a crowd had assembled outside the jail. And as time wore on, and the fatal moment more nearly approached, there were many additions to the assemblage. Until, at the hoisting of the black flag, it was estimated there were at least 15,000 people present. All they saw was a grim-looking bunch of black bunting, which was unfurled when the sentence was carried out. Just before the white cap was put on Henry, he exclaimed, "God have mercy on my soul." Emily is buried in St Mary the Virgin's Church on Acop Green with her husband, Thomas Palmer, who died 3 years after her. Their grave is marked by an impressive obelisk which was paid for by the Licensed Victuallers Association. It is said that Emily Palmer's gentle spirit haunts this graveyard. The White Hart Inn was demolished and replaced by a shopping centre called Fletcher's Walk in the 1960s. Fletcher's Walk was in turn demolished in 2017 to make way for a new development. Henry Kimberley's unkempt and desperate shade was seen pacing in agitation and desperation in the shopping arcade, searching for Harriet. Whether he is still searching for Harriet on Paradise Street, I do not know.